So our general rule of thumb is at the rim, 1-on-1, get it done. Like you need to have skills to do that. 1-on-2, it's not for you. And then 1-on-3, you got to come sit with me, because if you couldn't see 2, I don't know how we're going to get you to figure it out 3. So, but 1-on-1, get it done. 1-on-2, it's not for you. And 1-on-3, you got to sit with me.
All right, we are here with another episode, not even D2. Definitely got great episode on the way where we talk with Coach Fulks, currently the head coach at Davidson College. Just had a really good year in the A10, career highs with 13 conference wins, 19 wins overall, building upon another successful year that they had 2 years ago where they had to cancel the season. But, I mean, this is a really good episode. But first, bro, I feel like we got to talk just how you doing. I know you coming off a workout, but just talk to me. You in New Hampshire or New York City right now?
Yeah, I'm in New Hampshire right now. I just got back last Sunday night from our trip to Syracuse and New York City. And yeah, I just got back from a workout. I was filming Dunk. They were playing 4-on-4, Duncan, Georges, Eric, these 2 kids, Quinn and Lucas, and then this kid Jackson Baker. They're all playing 4s at a local high school. So was filming that. It was a lot of good hoops. So been good though. How about you?
Chilling, bro. If you've been watching on YouTube, you see I got a little color coming back from vacation, like you said, Syracuse, and I was in North Carolina for a little bit. I don't know if I like the darker look on me, but we'll rock with it. Outside of that, just been chilling. I feel like I blinked and summer's coming to an end, bro. We both going back to school soon, so that shall be interesting. But yeah, life's good. Yo, we gotta talk a little bit longer. Maybe next episode or something. But I'm catching up on Marvel, bro. So that's been fire.
Wait, so you watch Iron Man and
yeah, I watched Iron Man, the whole Captain America, Thor, the Avengers, and I'm on Iron Man 3 right now.
Wait, so you're watching them in order, right? Of the year they came out?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Good. All right, that's good. Yeah, we'll definitely talk.
All right, let's get back to this episode of Coach Fulks. Like I said, coaching at Davidson College. I want to hear your thoughts, but first I want to clarify some things real quick, some basketball terminology for people that might not know. We talked about tagging, and tagging is like a term or basketball scheme that teams use as describing their effort to kind of be organized on the defensive end. So how it works is it starts on the offensive end now. So when a shot goes up, the players are, like crashing, but they're finding their matchup while they're crashing. So basically, if I shoot and Naruta's close to me, that is my matchup going down on the other end. So when we're coming back on defense, when the other team gets the rebound, when we're coming back on defense, I know my matchup. It kind of solves that organization or that scrambling period that some teams you might see in transition. They don't know, or they get mismatches or switches. Like this kind of solves that tagging, because now you're just on your matchup. You know who you're guarding for that possession. And then once the other team gets into their sets, you can like switch, get into your real or primary matchups from there. But I just wanted to clarify that. And then also, I was listening to episode and I didn't make sense on one point. I was saying that during the Olympics, you didn't know like who the other players were on the men's team, but I meant to say on the women's team. So what I was saying is on the international stage, USA and France had a really good game, and nobody knew who the players were on France, but it was still a dogfight just because they're like, you'll understand later on in the episode, but I had to clarify those 2 points. But great episode, like I said, with Coach Fulks. Let me hear what you're thinking about this episode and talking to Coach Fulks.
Yeah, shout out Coach Fulks for getting on the pod. Definitely great episode. Glad we could get someone from the women's side of basketball on the pod. Always love to see that, and definitely more to come with that side of it. But definitely a great episode, like you mentioned. It was a great conversation with her. We had a lot of good basketball talk. Talking about, like you mentioned, tagging. I love the her input on just recruiting overseas and bringing in women from overseas basketball. We see it a lot, in mid-major basketball today with Australia, Europe, whatever it may be, bringing players over. So that was interesting too. And just to hear her, perspective on building a winning program at a, high academic school like Davidson was very interesting. Your question about Stephen Curry and his impact to the program was also a very interesting discussion. So it was a great conversation with Coach Fulks. If you're a basketball fan, you're going to enjoy it. And I'm really excited, for the viewers to get to know her.
Yeah. But I was thinking, like, looking through her records and even Davidson before she got to Davidson, I was like, yo, what she's doing is pretty impressive because Davidson's not an easy place to coach at, especially when you talk about they're playing in a conference like the A10. So you mentioned how Davidson's a high academic space. That's closing. We can banter about if this is a positive or negative, but they have a specific circle or group that they can recruit and actually get to their school. So that's already a tough challenge to get over. They don't have a summer session program. So where we're going to talk with somebody from Richmond who on top of the A10 last year, and then they're getting in the summer already, where Davidson, they're not going to be able to work out until, they arrive to campus. And then also they don't have a grad school. So where a lot of players or teams in their conference or around the country can have grad students come over or fifth years stay, it's like Davidson doesn't have that. And what I like about Coach Fulks is she's saying to a lot of that stuff is like that we don't see that as a negative to our program. Like, we're able to work around that, doing this, and this, or that. And she'll talk about that in the episode, but it's just cool that she doesn't use any of that as excuses. And she's continuously, like, they were one of the, I don't want to say worst programs, but they definitely weren't a top program when she got here. And now you're talking about, now you're talking about Davidson as, a contender in the A10. They were like this close to making the tournament. And I can definitely see them making some noise this upcoming year.
Yeah, I mean, all great points that you just made. And yeah, I think you're right, bro. It's definitely impressive what she's doing at Davidson. Building a great program there, and that's the mark. That's the mark of good ones, right? Coaches that are able to just figure it out. And to your point about her not seeing the grad transfers as a negative, it makes me think of Coach Kimbrough, where we asked him in our episode, 10 years ago, whenever that was. Now we asked him in that episode, just like, you didn't see Hampton-Sydney as an all boys school, that being a negative when it comes to recruiting. You know what I mean? Like, finding a way to still like get recruits and get good players to come through there. So definitely shout out to both of them for being able to figure it out, in their respective situations.
Last point about Coach Fulks is she's had like a lot of stints at different programs, WNBA, college, and I like that she's like taking a mixture of all those stops and just helping her in her career now, and it's definitely paying off, bro. And like you guys had like a longer conversation, we didn't talk too much about it, but the impact of working at Davidson with Coach McKillop, like all those things she's taken like in a secret notebook up top, and it's just like I said, I can see Davidson really continuing their trajectory on the slight incline. So we're big fans of Davidson, and let's hear from Coach Fulks. All right, we are here with Coach Gayle. How you doing today, Coach?
Doing great, guys. Appreciate you having me on here.
Nah, definitely appreciate you getting on, Coach, to talk to us a little bit about what you've been doing today.
We just got to do an individual workout with one of our players that's back on campus, getting ready to go out and do some recruiting this weekend. So a lot of laundry, to believe it or not. I got 2 small kids, so I feel like that part never ends. But yeah, it's been pretty low key at Davidson because we don't have summer school. So this is a little bit more of our downtime than some other places. But it's been a great summer so far.
I'm curious, what are some of the, because a lot of schools right now, they have their girls or their guys on the men's side, they're having them in their summer sessions, getting to work out. So what are some of the things that you're doing to kind of, not fall behind in that aspect and keep the summers as a productive tool?
Yeah, I think it, really starts with recruiting and making sure you're recruiting, kids that are really motivated and driven. And, when they're at home, you can expect them to hold themselves accountable to getting better. And our kids are doing it because they want to win and they like want to do it for each other, which I think is a pretty powerful thing. So for us, I've found it to be a huge advantage to actually not have summer school. Because we've got motivated kids that are doing a lot of the work at home. Some are playing with their national team, so they're kind of caught up with that. But for me, it gives the players a break. They're hearing our voice for 8-9 months, and for them to be able to go home, we've told them to get better at some things, them have a chunk of time to work on those things and actually come back with improvement, allows them to think, hey, this year's a different year. I think sometimes when it's all just kind of one thing, it's hard for a kid that maybe didn't have a season they expected to have and have high hopes for another season to kind of feel like it's just all one thing. And that I think is leading to some transfer portal issues. I think for us, them getting to go home, have a break, add to their resume. If they want to do, an internship or go traveling or whatnot, it's kind of letting them choose their own adventure, but also understanding we've got big goals basketball wise. And that's why they came here, is that they want to do great things with that too. So it's a balancing act, but I don't think we get behind with it at all. I think if anything, it's an advantage because everybody's excited, when they get back. It's not like, I'm coming back for summer school. It's a little bit, I don't know. We got a different energy to us. And I think it's a huge part to it.
That's cool. I kind of like that. I've never really heard that before, honestly, Coach. Like,
Yeah.
KJ and I finished up playing Division III hoops, and it's like we couldn't go back in the summers, and it gave us kind of a reset for the summers. But at Division I, you hear that, oh, you're back in the summer, you're doing summer school, but you're saying like, hey, this is a reset for our players. We're going to give it to them, and it's going to help them be at their best.
Yeah, I think it's a huge part. So, we've actually, I would say we're probably one of the most stable programs in the country, in that over the last 8 years being at Davidson, I've never had anyone walk into my office and say, hey, coach, like, this isn't for me, I want to transfer. That's never happened. Right. So for us, it's a big piece. And I think the summers away, like, really allow kids to have the space they need to get better for themselves. So.
Yeah. Shout out to you, Coach, building that environment. Kids aren't trying to leave your program. But on another note, just real quick, I'm curious, do you follow any of the WNBA?
A little bit, yep. I was watching the Aces Liberty game last night before.
I watched that last night too.
Yeah.
Tough to see Asia go down early in the game, but I'm a Liberty fan, so got the dub last night.
Yeah.
But what are you looking at when you're watching those games? Is it just as a fan, or are you watching because I know Sandy's got some sets that coaches can definitely steal.
Yeah, I would say, for me, when I'm watching the WNBA, I'm more just looking for trends. Like, hey, like, how are people guarding at that level? How are people, generating advantages? Like, what are some, tricks to it? What are the details they're doing at a higher level than maybe some college players? I was watching, some, like, dribble handoff stuff. And, there was just, some of their players have got really good nuance with like the cadence of their dribbles and things. And so it's just really good talking points, right, for our players. It's like, hey, that works really well when, Brianna Stewart's doing it, and it's like, well, why? Right. And we're not all of a sudden going to be 6'6" and be Brianna Stewart, but like, there might be some things that she's doing we can do. And so it's like, hey, we need to try to utilize those things.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I want to talk about some Davidson basketball.
Mm-hmm.
So you're coming off a year career high in wins, 19, and then 13 conference win, also career high. So I'm just kind of curious what went into like this offseason trying to build upon that, whether that's roster construction, talk a little bit about that, but also some of the, offensive, defensive philosophies that you kind of are thinking about implementing going into next year.
Yeah, this year was really meaningful for us because the year before we had to cancel due to injuries, right? So we had a great season and we had beaten Duke. We had beaten some really high-level programs in non-conference play, and then had just a string of really unfortunate injuries. And so essentially it was special for us because coming out of that, we didn't have a really long preseason. We didn't start doing contact until October with our players because we had so many kids that were coming back from injury, or they were mentally a little bit, guarded, just seeing a season get canceled and things like that. So we're doing things quite differently, this off season, because last off season was so weird for us. And so what was not weird for us was that we didn't have anybody go into the transfer portal. So we had a roster that was very stable. And so for us, we were essentially kind of taking inventory of, we had some great players graduating that had a lot of experience, but we do feel like our recruiting had been very good, and we've got some players that are ready to step into some bigger roles. But they're a little different, right? The actual skill sets of those players are a little different than the ones that we're playing. And so for us, we think we're going to be a faster team than we were. We think we're going to be able to play more in transition. We've been one of the slower paced teams. And a lot of that was we had some really good half court players. And so, for us getting out and playing a little faster, kind of developing the skills required to do that has been a huge piece. And from a recruiting side of things, we were very intentional out of the transfer portal of kind of adding a guard that really could do all of the things that, we need a guard to be able to do. That we were losing kind of in Izzy Morgan and Mallory Haynes, two of our best 3-point shooters. So we were really looking for a guard that could really shoot the ball, but also be a playmaker. And so we targeted those out of the transfer portal and ended up with Angelique Iziaka from San Francisco. And really adding her into the fold with who we have back, I think is huge, along with us bringing in 3 freshmen that are all have high-level international experience. So I feel very good about, while we had a ton of experience graduating, we're bringing in players that have a high level of experience for their age. So I think that we're plugging those holes, pretty nicely.
KJ is going to ask you a question a little bit later about what you look for specifically in the transfer portal when it comes to like your tagging defense. But one thing I am wondering about, Coach Toole talked about like how like he's coach of Robert Morris University, and he was talking about how like in the transfer portal, guys will always say the right things. So it's tough to really determine like who's really going to fit into the program. But for you, obviously you guys have a winning program. How do you like bring in players and find players that are just going to add to the culture you've already built?
A style of play is going to be first and foremost for us to find players that we feel fill a need that we have, as well as just our general style. So that's going to be first. Most of the transfers we've had previous relationships with them. So we recruited them out of high school. Angelique is a little bit different in that we didn't have a true previous relationship, but through some of the international basketball contacts, we had relationships with people around her, which made things go pretty smoothly. But for us, I'm always going to talk to the other coach, like the head coach of the other program. I want to know, hey, what went well, what didn't go well? Like from your perspective, would you have done things differently? Any red flags, any yellow flags, I think as a head coach, you get to pick your problems, you can have the problem of not being able to score. You can have the problem of a kid's a jerk. You can have, you get to pick which problems you have. Right. So, for me, I just want to know if there are problems, what they are. And I think that we're always trying not to have any problems. Right. But, if there are going to be some problems, we need to know those on the front end and have kind of decided to take those on. And because I do believe once a kid comes into our program, it's not a tryout anymore. Like it's an investment into them graduating and them having a role. So we got to be ready to kind of work with them through those things as much as we can.
That's special. On kind of like the same lens, we've been talking with a lot of coaches or players on the men's side. Our fault that we haven't been shedding light on the women's side, but that'll change starting now. But I'm kind of curious, like NIL is so big right now, and some of the numbers that you hear, over $1 million to sign a kid, you don't really hear how that's affecting the women's side of things. So I'm kind of curious how how NIL is impacting women's basketball, but specifically in Davidson, like what are those conversations like, trying to get deals and things of that nature for your woman?
Yeah, I think kind of the answer is twofold. And so, I look at it more from like a holistic recruiting issue that we've had over the last couple of years since all of this happened, right? Is that, kids are not necessarily choosing schools, particularly in women's basketball, and I'm sure in men's basketball as well, for a lot of reasons, right? And so for me, I tell kids all the time, I really would love for you to love me, like me, all of those things. But if I'm the only reason you're choosing Davidson, that's not enough. This is a lot of time. There's going to be a random Tuesday that you really hate my guts, and if I'm the only thing that's holding you to this place, Like we're not going to probably be able to work through this hard thing together, right? Because it's so easy now. You don't have to sit out. You can chase this, you can chase that, right? Like there's this path of least resistance mentality that's available. And so we're really like diligent in the recruiting process of, hey, actually recruiting kids that are choosing Davidson for a lot of reasons, not just one reason, and can see themselves being successful here. And we've got such a wonderful institution that has such a track record of kids getting jobs or getting full scholarships to graduate schools or going to go play pro. We've got a lot of those connections. For us, it's a long-term game because that's how we're investing. We're not looking at this as like a tryout like some schools are. And so for us, we're taking a different approach than a lot of other places are where, they're leading. I mean, it takes me a long time to offer a kid, I mean, 2027, like I haven't offered kids, yet. And that's 2 classes from now, right? Like we're still trying to figure this out with 26. And I just really believe in roster construction and how would a 27, be able to, like, how can I pick the right 27s to go alongside of kids I don't know with the 26s? So it's like for me, let's get the 26s right, and then we can really turn the page into 27, and then 28, and then keep going. And so when you ask about NIL, it's not really a huge part of our equation, to be honest, because we do have revenue sharing money, we do have those things, but it's not really part of those conversations on the day-to-day in our program because it's much bigger than just basketball if you're at Davidson. So for me, those are the things that are most obvious, like how our environment's different. And I can't really speak to how transactional everybody else's programs are. I mean, some head coaches or assistant coaches are offering kids on their very first phone call. I mean, like that, if you're doing that, you're probably also doing a lot of other things without a lot in mind, right? So talent's going to attract me to a player. The academics are going to kind of be a filter, and then I've got to really dive into the character and if they're a good fit. So that's kind of how we go about things here.
Two different things, Coach. One, I'm sure any prospective student is going to be happy to be in Davidson, North Carolina. It's a beautiful area, number one. But then number two, I just like the point you made about like you're not mixing and matching players. Like you're trying to uphold a culture and trying to build a specific team. So I can only commend you for that in the era of NIL and revenue sharing to really stay true to, your philosophies.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I mean, it's, I think this place is a unicorn in college basketball. Like we're doing things very differently. We have a very different school. And to me, I feel very fortunate that this is, how I feel is the best way to lead, but I'm also able to in our environment.
I mean, it's how you feel and you're also executing on it. You know what I'm saying? You guys had a really good year this past year. And I want to talk a little bit specifically about the, let's say basketball. Let's have a basketball nerd conversation a little bit. So listening to, some different episodes of, different podcasts that you've done, you talk a lot about your offense and, watching your offense, it's a lot about, audibles, read and react. And in 2025, a lot of basketball today is about creating an advantage, keeping an advantage, and expanding on that advantage. And like I said, that's a big part of your offense. So first, just talk about how this philosophy has kind of been developed in your coaching career, but how you also build your offense around these ideologies.
Yeah, it was really funny. I was a combo guard, growing up, and I was a coach's kid, and I started coaching my own AAU team when I was 14, or I was an assistant coach when I was 14 for like a little kids AAU team. And then my last summer in high school before I went to college, I was a head AAU coach. And so I was coaching my own team and learning on the fly a lot of things, and then ended up coaching an AAU team during the summers while I was in college. And then got the opportunity to go to the New York Liberty, right out the gate, and then get right into Division I coaching. So really, like, what kind of came to my mind was that, you don't really get a lot of time to, practice, when you're coaching these AAU teams and, that type of thing. And I did a lot of kind of stupid things, like randomly put in a 1-3-1 at halftime that we had never practiced. And, it was like, hey, we're going to run this play that I drew up with like a bunch of like 15-year-old B team kids, like out of a timeout, like we've never practiced. Right. And so I got like a lot of reps at like, hey, this is like not easy to, be random. right? Like I need to be a coach that has a little bit more of an eye for like systems, and so I was kind of learning that. But my first couple of stops in college coaching didn't have them, right? So the WNBA with the Liberty had more systems, and I found that to be really helpful. They were running a lot of ball screen, more of a priority on shot selection, those types of things. But then my first few stops, just were a little bit more play driven. Like, we run plays. These are the plays. Let's put the plays in. Let's run the plays. And, I did my best at coaching them and trying to get players to be better at reading the screens and things like that. But I found myself being like coaching that way because that's what I was asked to do, but not necessarily being convicted that that was how I would coach if I ran my own program. And then I had a pretty, I would say, transformational experience about why I felt that way when I was recruiting at Wake Forest as an assistant coach. And so at the time I was an assistant, and there was a kind of like graduate student that asked to be part of the women's basketball program, James Jansen, who was going to graduate school for health and exercise science there. And he had reached out to my boss at the time and said, "Hey, could I help with the program? I've played some low-level professional ball. I've been involved with girls grassroots basketball back in Australia. Like, I think I could help." And so I started getting to know him and got a chance to go recruiting in Australia. So I actually got my start going over there and staying with his grandma, staying with his parents, and they kind of helped me drive on the wrong side of the road. I mean, the other side, so just little things. But when I walked into my first gym over there in Australia and I saw like a 12 and under court, a 14 and under court, a 16 and under court, an 18 and under court, a pro court, like they were all playing like in one space, and they were all playing on a 24-second shot clock. And they were all playing with more systems in mind. Like, you watched one court and it looked similar to the next court, and it looked similar to the next court and similar. And I was like, wow. And it occurred to me that I really love decision-making, right? Like having kids make more decisions versus, run plays. And it's like, okay, well, why is that? And it's like, well, they're playing with a 24-second shot clock and they're much better at it. Like the stuff these 12 and under kids were doing in this basketball game, and it was all shot clock related, right? And so they were like, oh, the shot clock. Well, they had to make decisions. They couldn't just ask the coach, "Hey, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now?" Like, they had to get into a ball screen. They had to do the next thing. So when you're talking about advantages, it just became really obvious to me with a shot clock, you better be training your kids to be able to do this. And so it was a little bit of a shift for me of, I like it better. Like, I like watching it. I liked like watching how the coaches were coaching it. But I realized, hey, I needed to connect. I needed more systems in place for how we practice, what we do in games, but also develop a style that has more systems in place, if that makes sense. So it was like this connection point. And then when I got to Davidson, I was all in. And so I actually hired James Jansen to be my assistant coach at that time, and he's now my associate head coach. So long story short, I would say those were kind of my two kind of transition or transformational experiences that led me to, how I go about things now.
Yeah. Like I said, like, it's awesome that experience that you had in Australia. And it's really taken off overseas, that read and react type of basketball. And, here in New Hampshire, I've mentioned on the podcast, KJ's probably tired of me hearing it, but I've been working with this guy, Mitchell Kirsch, in the area, and he does a lot of, read and react basketball and, using constraints. Like, here in New Hampshire, there's no shot clock at the high school level. Yeah. So really the kids, like when we have them in the gym, we're putting shot clocks on the, short-sided games. We're like, hey, you got to make a decision in
14 seconds, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, that's going to prepare you for, they're younger, but that's going to prepare you if you really want to continue the basketball thing.
For sure.
Yeah, 100%. I think just real quick, every viewer that listens to you talk needs to hear this. Can you just go through the one-on-one phase?
Yeah, sure. So, in general, we're really big on shot selection, right? So we're relentlessly hunting what we call a we shot. And so that is anything open. So any open shot or any one-on-one contest at the rim against somebody you can score against. And so our general rule of thumb is at the rim, one-on-one, get it done. Like, you need to have skills to do that. 1-on-2, it's not for you. And then 1-on-3, you got to come sit with me, because if you couldn't see 2, I don't know how we're going to get you to figure it out 3. So, but 1-on-1, get it done. 1-on-2, it's not for you. And 1-on-3, you got to sit with me. So.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So on the other side of the basketball, and I find this pretty interesting that I don't want to say known for your offense, but like that's a big part of Coach Fulks' identity is the offense. But you guys also ranked pretty highly on the defensive end, and 3-point differential, 3-point defense. I saw that teams are only shot 26.6% from 3 against you guys this past year. So you're really getting after on the defensive 3-point line, but also I know that like you're trying to create advantage, but you also on the other side, you don't want the other team to have an advantage.
Exactly.
So I was just wondering if you could talk about how you think your offensive identity kind of translates to some of the defensive success that you've had throughout the years.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking in our program about advantages all the time. Like, hey, do we have a numbers advantage? Do we have a long closeout? Do we have a mismatch? Right. And if none of those things happen, we are essentially needing to bring 2 people together and then separating, trying to create one of those 3 big advantages to, with people or with the ball. And so for us defensively, we just kind of designed a system that wants to take those away kind of in a hierarchical order, right? So transition, well, we tag up. So we're trying to get rid of the transition stuff. Oh, long closeouts. Well, if you get rid of the transition, you're going to get rid of some long closeouts. If you start to, disrupt some passes and not allow the ball to move as freely, you're going to get rid of as many long closeouts. If you can keep one person guarding one person through switching or through peel switching, well, now there's not rotation, which now all of a sudden is another long closeout, right? So, or an offensive rebound. So for us, we just kind of engineered our defense to take away the things we feel like we want on offense. That was kind of how we engineered it, and have found a lot of success. But it is a recruiting thing too, right? Like you've got to recruit players that can do those things. And there's always going to be some exceptions like, hey, we don't want to be switching this and we're okay with having 2 on the ball for that because, hey, this kid can't score or this kid's just so good that we've got to be in rotation. We got to trap. We need to do those things. But as a base, our defense is just keep one person guarding one person for as long as possible and always make the offense have to do one more thing. So we're trying to make them connect.
Yeah. I mean, talking about the recruiting aspect of that, I know you're super intentional because you're tagging. You want to be able to switch a lot of ball screens or DHOs, whatever the case may be. So I'm kind of curious. I heard you say like you're looking for like a 5'7" to 6'2" type of female that can guard different positions.
Yeah.
Do you ever question in recruiting like, dang, I might be missing out on this really crafty elite guard or this really skilled elite big? Or are you like super confident at this point in what you're doing?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a balance, right? Because you want to be able to win games, right? So like you want to win, and there's always going to be just a trade-off at some point, right? Like I say, kind of pick your problems, right? So if you're going to be, selecting a player that's maybe bigger that isn't going to be as great at the tagging or great at the switching, well, is the other team always going to have their center guarding that kid? So, hey, we can be, that isn't a threat to pop and shoot, right? So like, there's trade-offs, right? So, I mean, we can make those decisions, and I would say we're not necessarily not recruiting those kids. It's more like, well, what's the plan? Who else is around them? What are they good enough that they're, people aren't switching on to them, right? Because if people are switching on to them, then the tagging stuff's a little bit tricky, right? So it's like, hey, who's actually, their 5 is always going to guard their 5. This point guard is always going to have a point guard that's guarding them. Like they're never going to have a bigger player. You know what I mean? So if we can kind of believe that, because we don't switch that much in the half court, we can switch everything in the half court. So like we have systems to not switch defensively, but not with the tagging stuff. Like the tagging stuff is what that is. So.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned recruiting in Australia. And I know that you're still like on an international basis. I was just kind of curious if you could talk about how that kind of works. Like, are you going to tournaments? How you're recruiting?
Yeah. So with Australia is where we started. James on my staff is obviously Australian. And so that was an easy like starting point. And I had gone over in my 5 years at Wake Forest, I had gone over 6 times. And so I knew a lot of the people and had a really good familiarity with the brand. And so when we got going in recruiting, Cassidy Gould was an Australian that we were loosely recruiting at Wake, that had played for the same coach that we had signed a kid that was actually at Wake Forest. And so had just a really good feel for who she was. We kind of started recruiting her and brought her in first. And so that was kind of organic with the Australian stuff, as we had relationships that were built. And then we started to expand a little bit and go into a lot of the FIBA tournaments. And so James does most of the tournament recruiting for us, where he does most of the international travel and goes places and is very well connected. He's pretty involved in the Australia basketball coaches like groups back home, and has done a lot of podcasts himself and a lot of Zooms. And he really took on a lot of that during COVID, when that was what you did. Right. And so internationally, he's gotten to know a lot of people through all of that. And he kind of leads a lot of that international recruiting, with our other assistants also dabbling in it as well. So it's a big part. I mean, it's a huge part of our roster right now, which is partly because it's the American recruiting system, I think, is a little broken. Kids are, with the unlimited visits, are not approaching official visits with decision-making in mind. And so they get on campuses and they're just kind of going through the motions because they can just keep doing visits and keep doing visits and keep doing visits. And they don't ever think about making a choice. And for us, we have really strict academic requirements. And so there's not an unlimited batch of kids that can get into Davidson. So if you come on a visit and you don't want it, I got to move on because I'll run out of people waiting on you, type of thing. And so internationals have been a little different. They come over, they visit 3 schools, they go home, they make a choice. It's just a little bit more streamlined for them. So I don't know if I answered all those questions, but that was, that's kind of how I've gone about it.
Yeah.
I have 2 things, Coach. First thing, kind of a random thought. What's your thought on like Australian food? Because I've heard it's pretty controversial. The thoughts on it from Americans and stuff. So I got to hear it.
Wait, real quick, Ruta. What's controversial about it?
People just don't like it. Like there's
okay.
Some people just don't like it.
I'm not putting Vegemite on anything, but other than that, like I've had great food over there, and their coffee is 10 times better. So
yeah, I heard we had a guy come in last year from Australia. He brought in the Vegemite. I was not a fan.
Yeah, the Vegemite is a no-go for me, but there's a tub of Vegemite in our locker room. There's a tub of Vegemite in our nutrition station. So for whatever reason, they like it. Not me. So
that's funny. No, I love the point that KJ kind of brought up about international players in their roster, because on the men's side of it, you see a lot of teams starting to go to the overseas markets and try to find players like Adrian Wojnarowski, who's the GM at St. Bonaventure. He recruited players from Russia, I think Italy, KJ, if I'm not mistaken. We interviewed a guy from St. Mary's. Some of his teammates was from Lithuania, right? And they talked about and you hear about, these athletes coming from overseas. They're like, the youth system and how we train is completely different. The mindset of the players is completely different. So I know you spoke on it a little bit towards the end of your answer, but talk more about your perspective of, international players versus like the youth system in America.
Yeah. I mean, I think that internationally, there's just a much more, there's a more defined structure, right? So you play your age group. If you're really good in your age group, you play up. Once you get a little bit older, if you're really good in your age group, you make a, state team. That state team then plays against all the other states at the national championships. And then if you're really good there, then you get picked up by maybe a developmental spot for a pro team. And so then you're playing with pros, and then select ones get selected to go to the Center of Excellence, where they get kind of high performance training, like an IMG setup, but for the national team system. And so there's more of a structure. And what I have found with the internationals in particular is that they have played more roles and had to learn way more things because the number of different teams they have to make. And so they're in these tryout modes where they have to learn things quickly. They have to be coachable. If they mess up drills, they just are not at the next practice because they got cut. You know, it doesn't happen in America, right? You know, but like there's just these systems, and like if you're, you know, they think you want to be a developmental player for a pro team, and you show up to the pro practice and you don't follow instructions well, like you're just not invited back, right? So like there's way more of these like moments where they actually have to have better attention than, you know, American players currently have access to. So you have that. They get more physicality earlier, you know, by playing with these older players and playing different roles. So, I mean, they, on their youth team, they might average 25 a game. On their state team, they might average 14 a game. And on their pro team, they might play 3 minutes a game. And they have to learn how to handle all of that, right? And that's all happening at the same time. You know, I think that's the thing, is that they're doing all of that. And so to me, you know, our international kids typically come in and I would say, you know, Sienna Dower had a pretty good experience coming from IMG. Like she was really well prepared, but just kind of coming in and needing to follow instructions, needing to, you know, do things with urgency. And quite frankly, like recognizing, hey, I'm playing with other great players, like being able to play with other great players. So I think that's the adjustment period. Is for some high school freshmen from America, they just haven't had that type of exposure where like they can kind of get fired, right? Like from a basketball experience, like they've always just been the best and everybody's catering to them. And the internationals have that experience too, like they do, but then they also have the other experience, which is they're with the older or the pros.
Yeah, you're seeing like the NBA, like the top 5 players are all international. But also on the international side, when you watch the Olympics from last year, the USA team, you would imagine they just walked through the tournament, but they saw like against France, a lot of people knew nobody on the France team, but it was a dogfight just because like the international game is really good. So you definitely said that pretty well. But this will be the last question before we go to break.
Yeah.
But like generally, when you think of Davidson, obviously most people are thinking of Steph Curry this, Steph Curry that. Nothing else really arises. So I'm just kind of curious how you're using his name as a tool when you're recruiting or when you're selling your program to other people.
Yeah, I mean, Steph's the best. You know, he's graduated from Davidson. He's given back to a lot of different causes, not just to the basketball programs, but to the community around Davidson, to different places on campus, you know, for kids that are a little bit more financially, you know, financially needy. He provides a lot for them. And so he really is just a great ambassador for us. But when I got to Davidson, the previous kind of staff was not necessarily kind of leveraging, he's the greatest shooter of all time, right? So Davidson women's basketball was the second worst 3-point shooting team in the country the year before I got here. And so us and LSU were the 2 worst, Shaq College and Steph Curry College. And so for me, it was like, hey, I have to leverage this. Like, I think every year I can recruit smart, skilled shooting players to Davidson. Like, that's who Steph is. Everybody knows who Steph is. You can go anywhere in the United States. They know who that is. You can go anywhere in the world. But I need to have a brand and a style that I can sell, you know, those players on and build around that. And so I think, you know, who Steph is as a human, as a person, you know, his belief in women's athletics, all of that I think speaks volumes to families because it's really well documented and it's real. You know, we're a huge beneficiary from his generosity. And, you know, that combined with the style of play that we're playing, people can see themselves, you know, like if you grew up with Steph as your favorite player, you also fit our system really well. Right. So it was kind of the marriage of those two things that we've really tried to like have an identity with. And obviously, you know, he's just the best. Right. So he's just so generous with his time and with his, you know, his finances. I mean, just everything towards Davidson College. He's just a tremendous, you know, advocate for us.
Yeah, that's special. Shout out to Steph. But Real quick, like I feel a lot of the women's coaches that are using like the top name of their school as like a recruiting tool is really smart. Cause I was thinking about how KD in Texas, like now Madison Booker idolizes Kevin Durant. So it's just examples like that that's pretty special. But stay with us while we take a quick break.
All right, we are back. Not Even D2 podcast with Coach Gayle. So looking at your resume, Coach, you've had a couple of different stops at, different universities, but also programs. You mentioned the New York Liberty, but also Wake Forest, Longwood, if I'm not mistaken, UNC Greensboro. So I'm wondering, now you're a head coach at Davidson. How do you feel like each stop shaped your approach as a head coach?
It's a good question. I'm going to take a step back that I don't want to discount kind of what I was doing with the AAU stuff. And the reason is that then I was a head coach, if that makes sense. And so I thought what was really cool about my start was I got to kind of learn how my decisions very early on, even when they were small ones with an AAU team, really impacted people. And so I think that really shaped how I thought about being an assistant coach when I got out and started doing that. But when I got my start at the Division I level with Longwood, it was a small Division I. We weren't even in a conference, so it was challenging to recruit. It was challenging to schedule. It was in Farmville, Virginia, which at the time had like one hotel that was like brand new. Not a whole lot to do when you're 22 to 27 years old when I was there, right? Like I was kind of there and I just learned how to work and get good at working because there wasn't anything else to do. And so I think that time really shaped me. I worked for Kristen Caruso, who is now the head coach at Central Connecticut State University. And she really gave me my first shot with that at the Division I level. And I learned a lot from her. She had played for Gino at UConn and, had, a lot of experience with basketball that was new for me. And we did some really cool things and did some things at a place that it was really hard to win at. And so learned how to do a lot of things with no money too. It was a low budget situation. So you had to learn how to manage a lot of money. And I was fortunate kind of to be given kind of the reins with a lot of the budgetary stuff, whether it was recruiting budget or gear budget or the like team travel. So kind of learning all of that stuff. And I was very busy. Let's put it that way. Very busy learning how to do a lot of things and keep track of a lot of stuff. It was like, hey, if I didn't do it, the bus wasn't showing up or we didn't have a hotel. So it was just a lot of responsibility. But that gave me, from a head coaching lens, like a really good understanding of how, you need to be smart about what you're asking people to do, right? Because there's too much. There's too much to do. And if you do a lot of things, if you're trying to do too many things, you're not going to be great at anything. And so I think that really shaped me as a head coach of saying, all right, well, when I become a head coach, like I want to be really good about what I ask my people to do because it is taking from something else, whether it's taking from their personal life, whether it's taking from their growth with watching the game or whatever. Time is really important. And so I kind of carried that into my time at UNC Greensboro. It was really short, but kind of flash forward to, I would say, my experience at Wake Forest, where my job and my role was really important, but I had way less responsibilities. Like I wasn't doing team travel. I wasn't doing film exchange. I wasn't doing some of the gear stuff. So I actually just got to dive into recruiting and basketball and player relationships. And that's when it became really obvious to me, like, hey, time is really important because, over on this other sideline, there's millions of dollars that are getting paid to make us look bad. You know what I mean? And if our players' mindsets aren't in the right place, if we haven't recruited the right players, if, we're not doing the right things in practice. I mean, these are people with a ton of experience that are very good at coaching, and our mistakes are going to be magnified on a bigger stage. And so time, again, coming back to time, really important. And what we spend the most time on, is the stuff that that needs to be the most valuable, right? We shouldn't spend a ton of time on something that's not really important. And so flash forward now to becoming a head coach, and time is the most important thing, right? At practice, time. What are we spending time on? It needs to be the things that happen the most. The most time needs to happen the most. And with our players, like, hey, what's a good time to be spending with them? Their time's limited. They're trying to achieve great things in the classroom. So they have a limited amount of time because of the academic demands. We have a limited amount of time with them. What are the things that are most impactful? Like, how can we have great relationships with maybe even less time than other places? So I think going from AAU all the way through, it's really shaped me at every spot where I'm trying to be great with time. And with that, it goes into every phase of our program.
Yeah. You always love hearing coaches reflect on their assistant jobs or different stops because it teaches them a lot. And you get to see what works as a head coach, but also some of the stuff that you're not going to do when you get a head coach. But you mentioned coaching at Wake Forest and ACC high major basketball. I was wondering if you could just give like a favorite memory coaching at Wake Forest.
Yeah, we had a good run there where I think we beat all three, Duke, NC State, and UNC all in 1 year, which was pretty cool. And so beating them all in one season was a good kind of, I would say, milestone. And really just that level of basketball, while it is kind of the Power Four, the high major, I think it gets lost a little bit because we all play in the same NCAA tournament, right? It's not like the college football playoff where Davidson football is never going to play in the college football playoff, right? It's a non-scholarship Division I league. Like, when you get to Division I basketball, everybody's competing for the same trophy. And so, I'll say that I haven't found the experience I've had at Wake or the experience I've had at Davidson to be that much different from a basketball side of things. I think the competition level's been similar in a lot of ways, or what we're trying to achieve is the same, if that makes sense. Whereas maybe on the football side of things, you wouldn't be able to say those things necessarily.
Makes sense. Yeah. So we got one more question for you before we get into rapid fire. But you mentioned how, Davidson wasn't the best program when you first got here. You came into a situation where you were designed to kind of, rebuild it. So I was wondering if you could give some advice for, young coaches or new coaches stepping into a similar situation, trying to revamp or rebuild a program.
Yeah, I think it's always in your best interest to kind of think about, hey, particularly if you have a multi-year contract, which I think is what most head coaches get signed into, is at least a 3-year, if not more, contract. But just kind of understanding that I think year 3 is when you need to sort of have all of your systems in place and an identity that you're really proud of. And so to me, some coaches come in and say, hey, we're going to coach the talent we have and try to maximize that in year 1 and then recruit to a system later. From my perspective, it was much better to say, no, this is the style and system I believe is going to be best long-term, under our leadership, and start playing that way right away. I did take over a program that had won, 4, 5, 6 games. So it wasn't good, right? I knew we would be as good, if not better, doing it just that way, and not necessarily trying to squeak out 1 or 2 other wins, maybe trying to just truly maximize the talent on the roster at the first step. So to me, it was like, hey, let's develop a style and identity, a brand of basketball that the community can get around, that we could be selling future players from a recruiting lens. Like, hey, you're going to potentially be even better at it because you're being chosen to play this way than maybe this player that we had to develop into that wasn't chosen to play this way. But I do think you want to have a brand, which is where Share, Shoot, Stifle, the brand of basketball we chose to build around, was so important. But I would say, what do you want year 3 to look like? Like, what's the vision for, 3 years down the line? Like, what are you going to be happy with, and start to kind of engineer it backwards from there, and figure out kind of what your basketball non-negotiables are going to be, and recruit to it. I think people really make a mistake when they take over programs that are maybe in bad shape about saying, oh, well, we're just going to recruit better players and not have a system or a style in mind. I think you need to have both.
A lot of gems right there, Coach. I love what you're saying too. Like, yes, talent is a big part of the equation, but it's the culture, it's building the philosophy and the ideologies, of offense, defense, like all that stuff is just as important as bringing in talent. So definitely love that perspective, Coach. But it's the end of the episode and we love doing rapid fire and starting 5. KJ got the starting 5, but I got the rapid fire. Are you ready, Coach, for rapid fire?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. So first rapid fire question. We actually didn't really bring this up during the episode, but you played basketball at Fairleigh Dickinson, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, what was your favorite basketball memory as a player at Fairleigh Dickinson?
You know, it's hard to kind of even think back that far. I think kind of going back, like I'm really glad I got a chance to play for the same head coach the whole time and kind of go through the growing pains of all of that, and be with a team that, we did have players kind of come in and out. The transfer portal was kind of part of the equation when I was at FDU. But just being, to me, it was an experience that was good from a basketball standpoint, but it was way more than that. Just being in a really diverse area, being near New York City, kind of taking on just the melting pot of that type of environment, that really kind of, to me, is the most memorable part of it.
That's awesome. Definitely, always love hearing college stories and stuff like that. It's cool to hear. Second rapid fire question. Who is a coach that you secretly admire from afar?
It's a good question. I would say that, like, getting a chance to be around Coach McKillop when he was here, like I was down the hall from him, but getting a chance to actually see how he was doing it, to me, like I really did admire. That was my first chance kind of being up close and personal, like with somebody that was living it out every day. I think that the obvious ones in women's basketball right now of, Gino and Dawn Staley, like both of them going to places, Pat Summitt back in the day, like taking places that had never been big time on women's basketball and making them a destination. I mean, Columbia, South Carolina, Storrs, Knoxville, like those are not massive destination cities, to have had that type of, career. And so I really would say I admire just the sustained excellence the three of them had in the women's game. And, two of them are still doing it at such a high level. It's pretty cool to see.
All legends. All three of those names that you named are all legends in their respective spaces. So definitely love that list. And then last rapid fire question I got for you. Sure. If you could steal one A10 player from another team, no rules, no anything, who are you taking?
Yeah, I love my team, man. You can't do this to me. Everybody in the A10's my enemy. So, I don't know. We've got some great players,
I got a different one for you.
Okay.
Who's A10 matchup that you're always like, all right, I got to be on my A game for this one?
Every year that I've been in the A10, the best teams have sort of been different. Richmond's been great. Mason's now climbed from the bottom to the top. UMass had their stretch. Rhode Island kind of had their stretch. St. Joe's has had their stretches. George Washington. And so, I mean, the league's tough, all the way around. I think heading into this year, I think that, Richmond's obviously, a team that we've got to, they're returning a lot of talent. They obviously had a great run in the NCAA tournament. And George Mason, they return a lot of talent, had a great run. I think those two right now are at the top of the league, and the rest of us are kind of chasing those guys.
Yeah. Richmond was 17-1 this past year in the A10. So definitely locked in for when you guys play them next year. But we're going to end this episode with starting 5 edition. So if you're a coach assembling a lineup, point guard through center, who's your lineup going to be? And this edition is going to be the best players that you've coached against.
Okay. So I would say that I've been fortunate to coach against a lot of great ones. So I don't want anybody, being mad that they were left out. Let's put it that way. But, up close and personal is obviously different than watching on TV. But, this past year, getting a chance to see Isaiah James and Sinai Rivers go against us and just put the team on their back and beat us by 2, was really impressive to me. Obviously, I'm still a little mad about that. But,
tell me what position they were playing your lineup to.
I would say, I would have Sinai be my point guard. I'm kind of rolling with Sinai there. I think she's pretty special.
She's tough
with the ball in her hands, and shooting still coming along, but just how dynamic she is. And quite frankly, I think watching the recording, it was pretty obvious. She said, "Coach, I have the ball from here on out, and I'm just going to score on Davidson. That's how we're going to do this." They were struggling to score, and she really took over. But then Isaiah James, I'd say at the 2 spot. She, I think, hit 4 threes on us in the first quarter, and it was like, I told y'all, like, she can shoot it. But she just got loose. She's got a really quick trigger and is doing some great things in the league right now. And then this one's going to be an interesting one for people, but Kirsten Bell, she's very good. She had a chance to play in the league, but down at Florida Gulf Coast, she torched us. We were not planning on her being out there because she hadn't played yet. She was transferred in and was missing a couple of games. And so she was surprised on game 3 of a 3-game tournament. So we were not thrilled about that. But we saw every aspect of her game and did nothing to deter her from any of it. So she's got a really big game. And then I'm going to go with a little North Carolina love. I've seen them up close and personal play well together. And that's Elisa Cunane and Liz Kitley. So they played AAU ball growing up together. We're the Twin Towers. And let's just say that both of those guys, particularly Lisa Cunane, can really shoot the 3. And I would have her almost as my 4-man with Liz as my 5. So, those little North Carolina love there.
I love it. That's a tough lineup, definitely. And you were telling us that you're non-con a little bit next year, so definitely going to have more players that you got to prepare for. So good luck. A lot of great ones. But that's going to do it for another episode of Not Even D2. We appreciate you getting on the pod, and we're big fans of Davidson College moving forward.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. This has been great.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Not Even D2.
Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, Twitter. That's the best way to support the channel.
And all episodes released on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's going to do it. And we'll see you next week on Thursday.
Yo, bro, that was a fire episode.
OD.